guess they're calling them creators now, or publisher. It can just because recipe sites are terrible does not mean that a newsletter can't monetize through advertising. I'm writing for tomorrow's newsletter about not boring, I think one of the more interesting newsletter success cases out there.
So today I'm joined by Brian Morrissey, and for nearly a decade, Brian has been the president and editor-in-chief at Digiday Media, running Digiday, Glossy and Modern Retail, focused on the audience side of the business. That included editorial, memberships, product development, design, multimedia and events programming. And now he's writing a weekly newsletter all about sustainable modern media, what that looks like, how it works at the Rebooting. You can check them out on Substack, and we'll put a link in the show notes. And that is exactly what we're going to be talking about today. So keep listening to today's podcast to learn how to monetize your media business effectively and sustainably. Hey Brian, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Ben.
And I want to start just by digging a bit into your backstory. Your whole career, as I kind of looked at your LinkedIn, was all about writing, reporting. Where did that passion come from, that decision to get into publishing?
No, I mean, I got into it sort of obviously early in my career. I didn't really think about it as a career in journalism. I never really considered it. I wasn't on the high school newspaper or the college paper or any of that. I always liked writing, but I thought of that as like something you learn to do when you're like 4 or so, and then you sort of developed other skills. I had no idea you could like actually make a living not developing any other skills. So I was curious about how things worked, and I liked writing, and it turned out that you could still build a career doing that. So I went to journalism school, which I think, a lot of people have strong opinions of it one way or the other. I think it could serve a role if you're, looking to break into the field. It's gotten a lot more expensive now than when I went, but it was still kind of expensive. And then I just, decided that I really was mostly interested in the intersection of news and business. I didn't want to write for like a local newspaper. I went to Columbia, and they seemed to be still training people in 2000 to go work for local newspapers that were dying out, and then work your way up to eventually get a job at the Daily News, and those jobs don't exist anymore. So I have a lot of colleagues from that time who've dropped out of the profession. I think as I started, reporting more, it was very obvious that it was a broken profession, particularly, focused on business. And I was focused on technology businesses. And, I think one of the things that has always been in the background of my own career is this conundrum of our times, which is finding a sustainable model for news in particular. And so I think it was a little bit meta at Digiday because, our mission was really to create change in media and marketing. And at least on the editorial side, we really interpreted that in many ways as like figuring out how this profession continues to exist. So that was meta in that we were covering this quest, but also living it ourselves as a small independent media company.
Cool. And so let's talk a bit about your current project first, the Rebooting. And I think you've kind of touched upon it there, but tell me a bit about sustainable media. Firstly, what is sustainable media for you?
For me, it's taking in more revenue than your costs and being able to do it on a consistent basis. That's pretty much it. And so I'm very agnostic about the ways in which you can do that. I think there are many different models that work within media. I think in general, I used to always counsel our reporters that we talk about a monolith of media or publishing, but these are really very different businesses. The kinds of people who create gear review in order to get SEO traffic and then monetize through programmatic ads, that business is almost unrelated to the kind of business that like a B2B publisher like Digiday would have. And so, a lot of times we sort of lump all these things together, but there's obvious major differences in how they can make money. But in general, you want to be able to create high quality content that reaches a targeted audience, and that through various mechanisms you can make make more money than your costs.
So let's talk about that. Let's talk about monetization models. And I know this is something that you recently wrote about on the rebooting. What monetization models like excite you most, or do you think are the most sustainable in terms of having longevity? I mean, you've talked about, okay, you make more money than you spend. That's for me, that's kind of like that's the foundation of sustainability. But in terms of monetization, what do you think is interesting and exciting? I know you're on Substack, which obviously in and of itself is a paid newsletter subscription platform. But what excites you, and where do you think the future lies?
I mean, I don't know where the future lies. Honestly, like in covering this stuff for so many years, I'm always reminded of it's like at least maybe in the US, it's like a children's soccer game because like the ball goes to one part of the field and everyone or pitch, I can translate here, and everyone sort of follows it, and then it goes to another place, and then all the kids like clump together. So right now everyone's clumped around subscriptions and newsletters and Substack and stuff like this. If you rewind 15 years, I mean, nobody was coming up with a business out of Silicon Valley and Web 2.0 that was not going to monetize through advertising. Now, nobody is pitching a business that monetizes through advertising. Um, that this is just a pendulum. It will normalize, to be honest with you. So I don't think that there is one model. I mean, if you look at the success of Morning Brew, that was purely on the back of advertising, and advertising done well can work for both the reader and the, I guess they're calling them creators now, or publisher. Um, it can be it can just because recipe sites are terrible does not mean that a newsletter can't monetize through advertising. I'm writing for tomorrow's newsletter about Not Boring. I think one of the more interesting newsletter success cases out there. It's sort of, to me, like the new stratechery, except it's making money through ads. And the guy who does it, this guy Packy McCormick, he's been doing it for I don't know less than 2 years, and like 40,000 subscribers, and he's gonna make $1 million this year off this thing. I mean, he hasn't gotten there yet, but he put it out there, and I think I sort of did my own back of the envelope math with just the inventory and what he's getting right now for sponsorships, and it's completely doable with very minimal costs outside of his time and focus, because he doesn't have to give a cut of that. He doesn't have to pay even salespeople. I mean, so I think there are a lot of different models. I think subscriptions has the biggest upsides, like $1 worth of subscription revenue is worth far more than $1 of advertising or event sponsorship revenue, because it's recurring revenue. Your costs on that revenue are far lower. There's no salesperson to pay a big fat commission to. There's no like expense account that you have to pay for them to take people out for drinks in order to get that deal done. There's no travel and so on and so forth. So yeah, I mean, subscriptions are, to me, for a lot of publishers now, the ideal is if they are the base of their business model. But I don't think it's all or nothing. I think everyone's going to have a different portfolio.
Yeah, and so I mean, obviously we've kind of gone through well, and some publishers still are paywalling content, and in order to encourage people to subscribe. As you're thinking about the rebooting and your own evolution or monetization of that, do you have a point of view on how that will be monetizable in the future, or is it more of just a passion project?
Somewhere in between. I mean, I sold one sponsorship that was kind of a lucky deal. I really appreciate MediaOcean for taking a chance on like a very new and honestly quite small newsletter. The monetization stuff right now, I'm interested in like sort of learning more. I think luckily right now I don't have the pressures of immediate monetization. So I'm really, and just to go back to like the, maybe it's because of top of mind, because I was just writing like the not boring newsletter is like, you got to decide if you put any friction in front of people, you're going to, if not stop your growth, you're going to really, really hurt your growth. And a paywall is a lot of friction. It's a wall. I mean, there doesn't get much more friction than running into a wall, I think. And so you're going to like, there's trade-offs to every model. And the trade-off of paywalls is often is audience growth, right? And possibly impact. I think everyone who is putting something out in the world wants to have some kind of impact. Not to be all like Pollyannish about it, but you're doing this this podcast for a reason, and one of those reasons, I'm pretty sure, is because you want to have impact. Am I right here?
Yeah, yeah.
You're like, no, not at all.
No, that's cool. I mean, you're talking about, we all want to have impact. Our impact is reduced with a paywall because our audience,
Uh, okay,
yeah, gets
full
stunted.
circle. No, and so I don't know. I haven't figured it out yet. I mean, for me right now, I would rather not be forced into closing the top of the funnel as far as because you're still kind of figuring out the product. I know, like at Digiday, we had a paywall that came in. It was a meter system after like 7 years. Okay. And like that really, really helped because we built the top of the funnel and the middle of the funnel before we really focused on the bottom of the funnel. And, we had an indirect business model that with events, because Digiday was originally an events company, that that paid for the newsroom, in addition to sponsor content and advertising and stuff like that, and awards and stuff. But, waiting that period of time in order to have a really solid funnel, because everyone ends up having to have a funnel, was a great advantage. We instituted paywalls for newer brands a lot earlier in their life, and the dynamics were as expected. They're different. You you hit a wall quicker. Um, I don't know if there's a law of funnels, but it exists. Like if you don't build up a loyal audience, and you can only hope to, most people say between like 6 and 10% conversion. Well, it's better to do 6 or 10% of 100,000 than 10,000, I think. But a lot of people can't wait. I mean, you need to make money. Everyone needs to like, um, everyone needs to pay rent or mortgages or anything like that. So uh, I think that's why I think it's not all or nothing. Like you could use advertising to sort of get by in order to get to the point where your product is mature enough that you feel confident in having a paid version of that. And you got to be honest with yourself. Sometimes, I mean, I'm honest. Like I don't think the newsletter I'm doing right now is to the point where I would I would charge for it. But if I do tomorrow, everyone should buy it.
Early bird deal.
No, I mean it takes some time. I don't understand. Like I don't know. I maybe it's being middle aged or something like this, and it's a problem. But like I think everyone is like kind of infected with this like overnight success story thing, and like media is really hard. And so for everyone who's like reading tweets about the creator economy and is like, oh my God, this person went from like 0 to 40,000. I was just talking about the guy who did, in like 18 months. Like that. Those are outliers. It takes a long time. I think I got like 55 like new subscribers like in the last like week, and it's free. So I mean, it's like but it's like it's slow. I've been doing this for like 20 years, and it's someone who like looked at like the numbers would be like, well, you've got whatever 40 something thousand Twitter followers and all this. It's like it's really hard. And I know for me personally, the part that I'm sort of struggling with is figuring out the audience growth aspects in ways that make sense to me in some ways. You know what I mean? Like, because the way you grow a newsletter, as far as I can tell, other than like, it's like guest posting in other newsletters, it's like tweet storms. It's stuff like I can't stand. I'm just like, I'm not, uh, like the self-promotion stuff is just, it might be the Gen X in me that I'm just like, it pains me. Like, I'm like the idea of like doing a tweet thread about a newsletter. It's like, I'm feeling queasy right now.
Well, I want to go from
Should I
talking
just
about,
pay someone to write the tweet thread for me so I don't have to like feel terrible?
yeah, why not?
Oh,
Then you don't have that awkward feeling. But no, I think you're so right though in terms of I think when we, you read about the hustle and what they've done, and you read about these success stories, but you don't see the. And yeah, I totally agree that they are the outliers. And I think sometimes people expect, hey, I can start this new thing and within 6 months or 18 months go from 0 to 40,000 subscribers and it'll be easy.
we always have this, right? I mean, I remember reading in Forbes, Fortune, or whatever. It's like, little things. It's like this company went from 0 to 50 million users in 18 months, and like, it's true. They did. Like I got the ComScore numbers. Like little things did this. This was a pet food company that pivoted into being feel good, like content that gets shared on Facebook nonstop, back when that was going off like a rocket ship. Problem was it was all sort of artificial. It was like based off of growth hacks. And so some of the stuff going on now, there's a lot of growth hacks going on, and that can work. That always works for like, a time. Whether it works long term, when we talk about sustainable, is another story. It didn't become very sustainable for little things. But I think everyone sort of gravitates towards the overnight, like, success kind of things. I'm reminded of like the Tour de France during like the height of doping, like, and like the Peloton was like going up like Mont Ventoux, like the steepest mountain at like 23 miles an hour. Like, the French are like, pas de normal. It's not normal. And it wasn't normal. It's because they're like, their hearts were barely working because their blood was so filled with like red blood cells. It was like sludge.
So, talking about things that work and things that don't work, I want to kind of shift the conversation to what you were doing for a decade, and that was at Digiday. You talk about, you've kind of touched on, things take a lot of time, things work for a time and then stop working, particularly with growth hacks. Like there's a limited amount of hacking you can do before the hack effectiveness kind of starts dropping off. But I'm curious, I mean, you mentioned Digiday started as an events business. Primarily, that was the monetization model. And then you introduced membership, and other ways of monetizing. So can you tell me a bit about that evolution from being an events company really to the way that monetization model kind of shifted over the years and what went well and what didn't go so well?
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, like I joined, I guess it was 10 years ago, this last month. And Digiday had been around for a couple years as an events business, founded by Nick Fries. And, like a lot of events businesses, they also had like a newsletter. Um, but I, I've never really been into events. I mean, I do events, but like it's not really my passion. But they're a means to an ends. And I think my previous employer, at the time, uh, Adweek, was really, they were treating events as like an afterthought, and were really focused on protecting their core business, which was mostly a magazine, full page magazine ads, in particular, like congratulatory ads. Like, I mean, trade publications love congratulatory ads, like nonstop. That's why there's all those lists. It's like the up and coming CMOs to know, because then they go and they shake down the CMOs clients to run a congratulatory ad. Works. Problem is if you keep going back to that well, it's like very thin economic value. So I preferred to that. I was like, anything's got to be better than that, because like 90% of our audience was getting our content through outside of the print magazine, yet if not 90% of our revenue and just internal focus was on this print product. So I like the idea if it's going to be an indirect model of having, events. I think that if you put community at the core of it, and it gave us time critically to figure out the editorial part, because like I said, it takes time, and that time was invaluable. Because you don't just start with an audience. Like I remember going back, like I don't know, we were getting like I joined like I don't know, maybe like 10,000 like page views a month. I mean, it was minuscule.
Yeah.
But um, you know, it's a cliche for a reason. The scarcest things you have are your focus and your time. And if you can devote both of those to building the the publishing part while still operating, the events business. Like I used to call events like my full-time part-time job, because as I said, I was never passionate about events, even though like I've like organized and gone to like hundreds of them. But they enabled us to build a newsroom that was like 30 people at the time I left, with no venture capital or any of that. And so if that meant you know having to go to New Orleans and talk about programmatic advertising for 3 days, I'll do it.
I'm interested. I mean, you said, yeah, starting out like humble beginnings. Everyone starts out small. That's just how growth happens. But tell me how you, tell me how that community, I mean, you talked about page views, but page views aren't the same as community. But there's an interesting dynamic you have with events and real life that is more community orientated. So what worked for you to cultivate that community and that kind of symbiotic relationship between events and community and the website? Can you talk to me about how that worked and what didn't work about kind of leveraging that community?
Yeah, I mean, I think what worked was, look, I always think you have to take, and none of this is like sort of earth shattering, so I apologize in advance, but like you have to take what are your sort of what seem like your disadvantages and try to figure out a way to use them as an advantage. Now, early on at Digiday, where the editorial team was like me and Mike Shields, Jack Marshall, and Sia Weissman, and that was it. Like having a 3-day event in um, Fort Myers, Florida, was the work. It was so disruptive, because nobody who was getting our email newsletter and the pressure we put on ourselves, we were like, oh, it's fine. You have an event. You just focus on the event. I mean, that's enough work or something. No, you had to like just fake it and like do them both at once. But the way you use it as an advantage, well, it's like you're in Fort Myers, Florida, with like 150 top publishers and then the equal number of like tech providers that are the business model. Um, you can figure out things that your competitors couldn't. It's a very efficient way of taking the pulse of the market, and finding out what you're doing, which is working and not working. And if you repeat that, dozens of times a year, that's an advantage, right? Same thing, honestly, with putting on good events. Like the biggest disadvantage I felt like we had was how many freaking events we did. But the advantage we had is that we had more opportunities to screw up. And if you have more opportunities to screw up, and I used to joke we committed every atrocity possible on the events side, um, you had more chances to improve. If you only do an event once a year, you only get one chance a year to screw up. And then you got to wait another year to like fix it. That sucks. So I think the biggest advantage was you come face to face with your audience, and you find out what's really on their minds. Like we had a lot of like um, on background sessions that enabled real um, real conversations of real challenges. We really focused on that, and that really helped because, as I'm sure you know, like a lot of the stuff that's discussed in media and marketing is just complete bullshit. It's generated by its PR. I don't know how else to put it. So that was an advantage. The disadvantage was that our the the people who consumed and came to our events were a small subset of our overall audience, and they had a particular view because of the business model and the reason. So they over-indexed in ad tech and stuff like this. I mean, if you just judge the media industry by Digiday events, it was nothing other than, collecting a bunch of audience data in order to target ads through automated systems. Like that's it. That's the only thing that, not the only thing, but that's like, and that's part of media, but it's not the full story.
Yeah. I'm interested. You mentioned atrocities, and you've got me. I'd love to know,
How
like,
long can we go? I
what? Tell me about some of your
which
biggest.
which category? I mean, you need to like just like categorize them. I mean, there's after hours atrocities, there's on stage atrocities, there's attendee atrocities,
What about
organizational
like
atrocities.
strategic atrocities where you did an event and no one turned up or something?
No, we never. I don't think we ever did that. I think if I were to say any sort of strategic atrocities, and I think a lot of people, I think the overall events industry sort of ends up in that is you do too much. And I think this is a problem that infects a lot of media is once you have like an infrastructure in place, and by infrastructure, I don't just mean technology, I mean people, right? Once you have that in place and processes and infrastructure and processes in place, you want to utilize it. You don't want it to be running at 70% capacity. You want it to be running at 110% capacity, right? So what that inevitably pushes you into doing is the answer is always do another event, right? Because you want to get that infrastructure humming at 110%. But you're left with a situation where you can both exhaust your audience because you need to market those events to your audience, and you also will end up inevitably diluting the product because it will become like a bit of a conveyor belt, and that is those things are really challenging because if you're doing like 60 events a year, they can't be unique. Like I'm sorry, like it's just like that's not possible. You have to sacrifice at some point. As I said before, everything is trade-off. And so if you're gonna do if you're gonna optimize to having your infrastructure at 110%, that's the hit that you're gonna take is on this sort of uniqueness of the events because you're going to have to stamp out certain aspects. And you can look for different things to do in order to make each event unique in its own way, but they're going to be fairly superficial.
Yeah, interesting. And I'd love to know what, in terms of your
Like for
time
instance,
at.
I would much rather have a model where you do like 5 gigantic events a year than do 15. It's always better to make a bunch of money 5 different times than a smaller amount of money 15 times.
Yeah. So, in terms of translating then that event to diversify the monetization from events through monetizing the Digiday platform, let's call it, um, what what really drove that growth, and what was most successful in in seeing that evolve and diversify?
So look, as I said, like events are an amazing gift, but then the opposite side is there's always a cost to it, right? And like one of the costs is that events are difficult to run, and depending on the event, like they can be difficult to monetize. I mean, there's certain trade shows where I've heard, like, this sounds like an amazing business, at least back in the day. Like sponsors at the end of the trade show would literally get in line to sign their contracts for like the next year. Like it's rare in media that anything is bought. It's almost always sold. Like Google ads are bought, Facebook ads are bought. This trade show thing, apparently, and maybe this is just apocryphal, that's bought. But just about every other thing, you got to be out there and you got to sell. And that's like, it's a pain in the ass and it's super expensive, because we used to have um, Neil Strau. I got to give Neil a shout out. He's still on Digiday's sales team, but great sales guy. And he used to always like post to Slack when he closed the deal. He's like 154 emails later, close the deal. And that's the reality. I would like show that to our reporters and be like, don't think any of this is easy. If you tell me you reached out to someone, I'm like, Neil's sending 154 emails to sign a deal. I want to see that same effort. Don't tell me you can't get a third party source. So anyway, I think as things evolved, you know, revenue is usually a lagging indicator of brand, right? And the brand was, in my biased view, had sort of gotten to the point where it could support itself with we started with sponsored content earlier and advertising and stuff like this. It was just really difficult to get a sales team that could execute on both. I don't mean this is a knock on Digiday's sales team. It's a great sales team. But it's hard to have people who are awesome at both things. Just the same way as like on the editorial side, just to be totally fair, do some self-criticism. It was really difficult to, we started a magazine to have people and processes from me down that were good at making a magazine, but also good at like doing like, great newsletters and website and podcasts and God forbid video or any of that stuff. So it's just really difficult to balance. And that's what I think. I think the pandemic has actually helped.
So part of the diversification was through the website and obviously membership through that, but also part of it was diversification in the publication as well, right? With starting Glossy and Modern Retail.
Well, because the media and marketing industry is not gigantic. It's not the energy sector or something like this. Look, it's overcovered clearly. I mean, and for the amount of money at stake that I mean, there's a lot of money that goes into advertising, which just goes to Google and Facebook. Like, I mean, do you really need? I mean, that's it. It's not much of a story. I think there's the ways that you can expand your like TAM, if you will, is we did a few things. One is geographical, was particularly with the events model, the live events model, there was a capacity to expand into Europe, and we did that several years ago, starting in the UK. But then we did events all through Europe and stuff. So that helped because while the US is a gigantic market and draws in Canada and stuff like that, it's not the only market clearly in the world. So we started with Europe. We did a partnership deal to do events and a publication in Japan. That helped a little bit. And then new markets, So with Glossy, it was beauty and fashion. It was originally just fashion and luxury, but then moved into beauty, which is great. Jill Manoff had that idea. Great idea, Jill. Great execution as well, Jill and Priya. And then modern retail, which was, the larger retail landscape is gigantic. And a lot of the same dynamics that were at play in publishing were at play in these markets. So again, but it's a way to utilize your infrastructure, right? I mean, because if you can create a larger addressable market, you'll have less of that exhaustion problem and stuff, and you can still have your infrastructure, running at 110% capacity. Because that was to me the biggest like gating factor. I'm like talking cliche now, but like is we had an issue with how much can you market to your audience. Like I had a few metaphors like that I would use for it, but one was like the Holland Tunnel. Our office used to be on Mercer Street, and in Soho, in New York, and at around 4 o'clock every Friday, back when people moved around, um, the honking would start on Canal Street for all the cars lined up trying to get through the Holland Tunnel. The problem is it's just one tunnel. There's 2 lanes. I feel like it's the same way with marketing. There's just one tunnel. You can only send so many emails through the tunnel.
So you talked about your infrastructure and running uh, and having the infrastructure in place, and that was your a limiting factor for you. Can you talk to me about how your team was structured and how it grew and evolved as the publications grew and evolved as well to support that diversification of revenue? You needed to adapt your product as well, which primarily was the content. So how did you change and how did that evolve?
You mean like the team structure
Yeah.
or?
Yeah. The team structure.
Well, I mean, I think one thing, you know, I wasn't great at the organization, and I fully admit that. But I think one of the sort of principles that I, I certainly, pushed was like centralize all that can be centralized and keep unique all that can't be centralized. Um, and you really got to start to think about what is, I don't want to say commoditized, but to a degree is you don't want to recreate things. Like I've been in multi-brand publishing organizations and they're horribly inefficient. I used to love to go back to some story about like Condé Nast having 153 CMSs because each brand needed to be super unique. I'm like, you don't need a freaking your own CMS. Like that's insane waste, and they're still, I think, stamping some of this out. There's probably like some like Vogue Polska that's using their own like ad server. Um, so you can't duplicate technology. You're not gonna like so you got to centralize that, but you can centralize a lot more. Events programming we centralized. There was no need to have two different events programming teams for you're gonna need to have somewhat generalists. They might not be as expert and stuff like this, but we wanted the editors and reporters driving a lot of the content anyway. So you want to centralize that. You want to centralize multimedia, but you don't want to centralize like editorial. So like to a degree, like Glossy and Modern Retail had their own editors who led it, but we treated it at the time. This is when I was there. I don't know if that's the case now, but we treated it as one editorial team and one audience side group, which included technology and memberships. Uh, and multimedia and events programming. So to me, that was key. And there's things like, for instance, like copy editing, even on the editorial level, you can, whether a copy editor can work across different types of content, like, and so you just really have to be thoughtful to me, like about um, the areas you can be more efficient in and the areas you absolutely should not try to be more efficient in because you'll end up it'll end up all looking the same.
Yeah.
And we didn't always get it right. I mean, there was all sorts of like quirks with like the technology infrastructures because we were trying to go too fast, in my view. But
Yeah. And in terms of that infrastructure that you built for membership, because you said that you introduced the membership on the new platforms on Glossy and Modern Retail earlier. What were some of the lessons that you learned from building a membership that you were able to translate effectively over to the other sites?
well, I think one of the things we learned was that everything didn't translate. So
Right.
as it turns out, like, when you talk about audience or more specifically communities have different like mores, if you will. I had lived in Brooklyn or New York City for 20 years and then I got in early on the exodus to Miami, and so I'm in Miami, and it's a different community on here. Things work differently. Same thing, really, when it comes to the different communities in media and marketing. For the most part, the community aspect is it's there, but it's constrained a little bit by a few factors. And there's also more like self-loathing in the media and marketing industry, I feel like. But when you move into glossy and beauty and fashion, like for instance, we did these confessions all the time, which people loved because it gave them an unvarnished view of all that's screwed up in the media and marketing worlds. It doesn't work as well for whatever reason in beauty and fashion. I feel like they don't just kind of don't like that sort of thing. They're a little bit more, optimistic and it's great, different dynamics. But also when we would have like um, events in that area and also in retail, like people would be taking notes, people would be, there'd be a lot of engagement, a lot of any sort of community based stuff we did was always oversubscribed. It just had different dynamics. Whereas like in media and marketing, you had a lot of people who felt like they needed to act like the smartest person in the room and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah.
I think it's agency people. That's my guess.
Yeah. Well, and I guess
They're always out. The agency people are always out there. It's like I got a call. I got to rush back for a meet. I got to be in Houston for a meeting. I was like, I don't know if any of these agency people have used this time in the past year to think that they didn't really need to be in Houston for that meeting. Like, where are the stories about the agency people being like, what have I been doing with the last 20 years of my life, flying to Houston for the meeting?
man,
What
that's
a
my
waste!
story.
What a total
That's what
waste!
I know.
So busy. I'm back to
It,
back.
yeah. No, it's the culture, it's the expectation that you'll let me just hop on a plane. I'll be there. Oh
I
yeah,
so we used to have metrics for the amount of like drop off we'd have at events, and it would be you would have to like plus it up by 30% for agency people because like the entire business model of agencies is the reality, but also the perception of being too busy.
yeah,
And go figure, agencies are incredibly inefficient. You wonder why, and they wonder why like clients are taking this stuff in house.
yeah. So in terms of the one of the things you talked about was introducing to Digiday, like the metered paywall. I'm curious about that component and how that translated or didn't translate well as you launched these new sites and how the community dynamic impacted that, maybe.
So I think there's two things when you think about what model is right for, because there's a lot of different flavors of subscription and membership. When we've, and you need to think about what makes the most sense for your community or audience, and you have to be honest about whether you have which you have. But also you have to be honest about what works for you internally, not just financially. And I think that's really critical because sometimes you get it's more than just accounting. Like people are involved and people are not don't neatly fit into spreadsheets. So what I mean by that is when we first started the membership, we wanted to create a completely different experience for members. And the idea was like it was going to be, I know it's like cliched now that everyone uses plus, but at the time it wasn't. We even got pushback from people internally who said that you can't name it Digiday Plus because Google Plus was such a disaster. I'm like, nobody's going to hold Google Plus against us. I mean, give me a break. Anyway, I'm glad we went with Plus. But the idea was you like Digiday, now you get Digiday Plus, and I see it's like TechCrunch, Extra Crunch. Okay, great. But we centered it around like a magazine and like meetups and community and stuff like this. And what we quickly realized was that we were this didn't make sense to both our audience and internally. It didn't make sense to our audience because it wasn't we were they really like our core product, and we were saying no, here's another product you should pay for, even if it's a related product. It was kind of weird. um, and internally it didn't work was because like we had a machine built and optimized and people trained in order to execute on a particular product that involved newsletters and websites and events and stuff like this. And then we were trying to introduce this other thing that required different dynamics and frankly different skill sets than we necessarily had when it came to like a magazine, for instance. So we just sort of rethought it and went back to what we were best at. And to me, a meter made the most sense because it allowed us to, externally be like, look, you like this product. And so, we're going to give you some of it for free, but like, if you're really into the product, you're going to need to pay. I think it's fairly clear. And then internally, more importantly, it could be like, just focus on making good shit that people want to pay in order to read. That's it. And the stuff you're good at already doing, keep doing it, do more of it, not necessarily do more of it, but do it better, go deeper. And the other stuff, whether it's a magazine or meetups and stuff like this, that's extra. That's because to me, that's not like enough of a core value proposition. Um, so I know there's downsides to metering, but to me, it struck the best balance between what the needs were of the community and what the needs were both financially for the company, but also like internally for keeping people sane and putting them in positions to succeed.
So in terms of the primary component of the membership was the unmetered access to content.
I mean, I found that like before we had the meter, I used to go on like on our events and I'd be like, listen, I need a slide every blah 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 every like 4 sessions in order to like be selling this membership thing. I was like the salesperson in chief. And like what I found was like the slide just had these walls of like bullet points and stuff like that. And you get this and you get this. And when we started sketching out this membership program, I was joking. I said the one thing we can't do is the football phone. And there was this like Sports Illustrated ad back in the 1980s that was like, you get 52 issues and you get the swimsuit issue. And also, if you act now, you get the football phone. Um, and even as a kid, I was like, my God, they're just like trying anything. I want that. But like, what does a football phone have to do with like Sports Illustrated? I just wanted the football phone. Um, I don't know. I just felt like, you know, we were trying to throw a lot of stuff against the wall and see if it stuck. Whereas, like, personally, I think, less is more. I don't trust those Greek diners with the 47 pages of menus. They can't make half that stuff. No way. I mean, are they gonna make a shrimp scampi at like 3 a.m.? It's like unlikely.
I
Why
think
even have it on there? Stick to the meatloaf and the eggs and stuff, and then call it a day.
I think the interesting thing about there's an interesting dynamic here because I think what you're talking about in terms of a metered paywall, that to me sounds like more of a you have an more of an audience more than you have a community who would be willing to pay for that. But then I think the interesting dynamic at play here is that you do have a community, but the community is more competitive among themselves. So that's maybe why that type of uh, event with that type of membership works better because the people are less collaborative.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely saw that. Like, I mean, for instance, we had like member events for years. Um, and like, I remember like the first one, like 7 people freaking showed up to our office. Oh my God. But this is what you gotta like grit and just go through. I mean, poor Ethan Stephanopoulos from Now This. I mean, poor guy. I had him come over. It was only a short walk, really, but like he's like talking in front of like 7 people. Sorry, Ethan. I don't think he hasn't. We haven't been in touch in a while. I wonder why. Um, but like what I noticed was the dynamics on like Glossy were totally different. We had member meetups. I remember going to a member meetup right before the pandemic hit. It's just like packed and great energy and stuff like this. And like, different groups have different dynamics. And I think, the truth of the matter is you've got like most people have a mix of an audience and a community. People just like to say shit's community right now. Um, I mean, look, the Wall Street Journal talks about a like membership. And, like, really? I mean, how do you have a membership of like hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people?
Yeah.
I just, it just seems like you're just calling it that. Like, I sort of appreciate that the New York Times is just like, yeah, subscribe.
Yeah.
You get access to like journalism.
Yeah.
Go figure. But to
Yeah.
me, like the thing with a membership in a community is like, do those people want to interact with each other? And can you convene them? So to me, like Digiday has, I guess, use past tense with me, a community, but it's a subset of an audience.
Yeah.
Does
Yeah.
that make sense?
Yeah, no, it does. It totally makes sense.
And I don't know, like in some ways it was kind of frustrating that like we never, to my mind, like nailed the community aspect on the the paid side. And we tried like a Slack channel and I don't know whether it was the tools or whether it was the fact that we didn't, for the most part, have a community. We had an audience, but I don't know. None of them really stuck, I guess.
Yeah, I think it's incredibly challenging. Like my experience of trying to transition from an audience to a community has been that it is a lot of work. Similarly to creating a publication, like these things don't just happen. You don't. It's
Yeah.
not. You don't
Who
just.
needs it, Ben?
But for me, that's the more interesting part of it. The community and actually helping people as individuals rather than as individual page views. For me, that's way more rewarding ultimately.
Yeah, it's definitely more. I don't know. To me, it's like, yeah, there's room for both. I don't mean to be like kind of mealy mouthed about it, but there is room for both, and it's really difficult. To me, what was very important, particularly early on, was that we did things that don't scale, and don't worry about when we have 30,000 members. We don't, so who cares? Like I don't. I'm like, talk to me when we have 30,000. I'll take all the problems we have, the workflow problems we have, because we put in place when we have 3,000 members and didn't think that we'd have 30,000. I'll take that problem. Um, so I think it was important always to do things that don't scale and being like, open to, because there's so many disadvantages to not having um, scale that you. So, for instance, like I'm doing some like advisory stuff now, and a lot of people talk to me about like membership, and then they go to like the tech platform and stuff like this, and um, to me, like with all the different tech platforms, it, almost all of them are too much tool than small publishers need. And that's because a lot of the fancy optimization stuff that they can theoretically do requires more data than most publishers have. So, you can just skip it. You know what I mean? Like I don't know, the Bloomberg is running like, I don't know, like 363 concurrent, like, multivariate tests and stuff like this. You cannot do that on a small scale. You can run like two experiments that have like an error rate of like 48%.
Yeah, yeah, and then yeah, was it really worth it?
Yeah. It's like ad tech. Ad tech is great at determining whether the gender of a person, like, they're usually right about 48, 49% of the time.
So I I'm
It's
curious
an
to
old
know
one. It's an old one. I'm here all
go
week, Ben.
going back to you and the rebooting. Tell me, like, what are your goals for this year? You started on this new side project. Well, it's not a
You
side project.
sound like
It is
my
your project.
wife. I think my wife comes down every morning. She's
What
like,
are you
okay, right.
doing?
So, what are the goals for the year? I was like, I'm just having a cup of coffee. Yeah. Um, I'm using this period as like my own sort of rebooting. I think that's why I like named it that. Although there's like reboot out there, I now see. So I have this like brand problem. But I'm kind of using it as a way, because you're so focused over 10 years, at least I was, that I would have so many times people, particularly who knew me from like pre-Digiday, who always like sort of, because people pigeonhole you as like where you were at certain points of their life, they knew you best. So like if you were like a reporter at Adweek writing like funny ad freak blog posts about, haha, look at this ad Crispin did. They think that's still what you're doing, which I get it. I do the same thing. But people would always ask me like, oh, well, what's the most interesting thing going on? What do you think? And I'm like, I have no idea. Like I'm dealing with like 19 fires at like one time internally that like it, that's the only thing I can focus on. So I'm just kind of using this as I don't have those fires anymore. Nobody reports to me, which is great. Although I loved and miss working with all my former colleagues. But using it as a time to explore the different trends going on right now and to figure out what lane I want to go in next for my career, whether that's starting something on my own, like that's more of a solo endeavor, whether that's maybe at some point starting kind of a small media brand itself, because I do like working with people, or whether that's joining like an existing organization in ways that ideally I would find rewarding and they can, hopefully I would have something to offer them.
Cool.
So I
No,
don't know.
there you go.
That's my exploration.
Now, for someone, I guess, in some ways similar to you right now, at the reboot of their digital media journey,
Thank you for working in there.
what's one piece of advice that you'd give them? And what are you telling yourself as you start the rebooting? What's one piece of advice that you're giving yourself?
I don't know if this is good advice, but I'll go with it anyway. Um, I always counsel patience, and I think in many ways, like the reason I say I don't know if it's good advice, it is because I think in some ways um, I've I've been too patient in my career. I've been I've been complacent, but I've rebranded it as patient, which is bad. But I do think that being patient is important. As long as you're focused and driven, being patient is incredibly important because um, everyone loves an overnight success story. I've never trusted prodigies. I don't know if I'm the only person, but I've always looked at prodigies with some wariness. I don't know. People who meet immediate success early in life, usually things go wrong. So I guess my advice would be to have a degree of patience with, because for most people, the cliche is it takes twice as long and it's twice as hard or twice as expensive, and it's that way for a reason because it takes a long time. And if you're going to try to like build something new or get good at like say like writing a newsletter or something, I know a lot of times like I am very rusty, but like, people were like, so how long does it take you to do the newsletter? And it doesn't take that long, really. But the reason is I've been writing like for 20 years. So like, I mean, you start to, I would always find that like really difficult internally because like you're people have different like capacities at different parts of their career and like, they can't like, you need to get your reps, you know? Like the reason, quarterbacks need their reps. And like if you're going to start a newsletter, start it and keep at it because you need to get reps, you need to screw up.
Yeah, yeah. I think there's that tenacity. There's patience, and there's also tenacity. And
Oh yeah.
the
Maybe I'll
it
rebrand it as tenacity.
yeah, tenacity. There you go. It's when it doesn't succeed, keep going, and I think that's an important lesson for
Yeah.
anyone who's starting out to listen. Keep going because it'll turn into something.
Well, no matter what, it's going to get harder than you think. I just think I don't know. I mean, you sometimes hear from people who is just like, oh, success, 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 and it's not really the case. I'm not like much of a failure fetishist, but the truth is, everyone hits a wall. Like with any sort of long-term endeavor, you hit a wall, and that wall can be like the number of subscribers your newsletters has, the number of members your membership program has, and you need to figure out ways around it. And it's really difficult, and sometimes you won't, sometimes people just won't, but it doesn't mean you don't try. And I think it's the same for people. It's like even like writing. Like I know, like over the years as a reporter, um, I would go through periods where like I didn't think I like wrote anything very good month or so. I would see it like internally, and I would have to go to reporters and be like, it's okay. Like, I know you're struggling right now, and it's normal. I've gone through these funks myself. Um, I
Good
hope I'm not
stuff.
in one right now.
Well, let's finish off with a lightning round, and
I
I
used to
won't.
do this. I used to do word association.
So I want to know. We've talked about your best advice, but what is the best advice that you've ever received?
You know, I was just talking to him earlier today, and since I mentioned my wife, many years ago, a friend from the industry, an executive at some big technology company, I'll go unnamed, um, he told me that I should get married, if only for the reason that you need someone who will tell you when you start to look weird. It turned out there was so much more to marriage, but like I thought that was really, it stuck with me for some reason. I mean, he told me this like 12, 15 years ago.
So, talking about every morning, which of your personal habits do you think has contributed most to your success?
Um, I mean, it's funny because I'm actually about to start a second newsletter about running as a passion project, a second passion project. Because I'm really into running, and it's given me a lot like of tools to use in life. I mean, it's, again, a lot of people try to attach too much sort of meaning to their running because it's an essentially mindless and ultimately selfish activity. But I think that there are principles because you have to stick with it, and it's not a straight line, and improvement is incremental, and takes it takes a long time to get good at it for most people. I mean, there are people who just like suddenly like are world class runners, but again, prodigies.
Can you share an internet resource or tool or website that you go use regularly?
Twitter.com. I don't know. I mean, I use Twitter. I mean, I know everyone I too am torn every single time I get my screen time report from my phone. Like, and I'm like, oh my God, what am I doing with my life? Um, but anyone who's like a sort of news junkie and wants to find out about, like, it's amazing how, like, Twitter can be a horrible, horrible hellscape, all the rest of it, and stuff like this. And I don't have to deal with a lot of that, obviously, as a man, and stuff like, for women and many minority groups, it's like an awful place. So I don't have to deal with any of that, and I'm very thankful. And I think Twitter's got to do a far better job at having healthy conversations on there. But the access that people have on Twitter to any number of successful, important people is it's amazing. It's amazing. I mean, I just kind of hate it because it's like it's so self promotional.
Yeah, totally.
Like I never even liked tweeting like our stories at Digiday, not because I wasn't proud of them, but I was like, hey, you should just follow Digiday for that. Like, why do you need me? Like, unless I have something to add to it, but if it was pure promotion, I'm just kind of like, yeah.
So I'll finish with promotion.
Oh God.
What book would you recommend and why?
Oh, I'm reading a book right now about fairness. Because I think a lot of, we're having a lot of important conversations about equity in our society, but within companies and stuff like this, and within management. And this is like a really difficult time to be, certainly to be like in any organization, but to be leading groups within organizations and figuring out like how to treat everyone and to have like an environment that is productive and healthy. The word toxic gets thrown around a lot, and I kind of can't stand it because it's so vague and like it can encompass anything as far as I could tell, all manner of ills. Whereas as an editor, I like specifics. But I think fairness is an interesting thing because it doesn't mean equal. Like people need to be treated fairly, in my view. There's a lot of people who talk kindness and all this other stuff. But in my experience, what people most want, and again, it's hard because it's different for every single person. It's to be given a fair shake, and too many people within companies and within our overall society aren't given a fair shake. And I think the last year has hammered that home, the inequality and so that's what I'm reading.
So, Brian, thank you so much for joining us today. Where can people find you? On Twitter, obviously.
No, check out the newsletter. It's the rebooting.substack.com. I have a unique URL. I gotta hook that up. And I only send it out once a week. So you won't get every day. Too many people publish too much. There's too much out there. So just once a week. And for now, I have a pretty narrow focus. It's really on building sustainable media businesses. In particular, I'm really interested in this new crop of, whether it's solo operators or whether it's small groups like going on at Defector. I think there's something interesting going on. I just haven't totally figured it out. And so as I sort of explore what's to come, this is where I do it.
Cool. Well, if you like what you heard today, check out Brian's The Rebooting, which we've been talking about today. We'll put the link in the show notes as well. But also, please subscribe and stay in touch on indiemedia.club. But until next time, thank you so much for listening.